Hey guys. Well, I can't see you, but I trust that you're there. I just want to say hello and greetings from Seattle, the most beautiful city in the whole world. The place that has the wealthiest zip code in the United States. In case you didn't know, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos live in the same zip code. It's the wealthiest zip code in the United States. Seattle is a city of innovation, really innovations that have touched the whole world. What they say, I don't know if this is true, but what they say is that half of the entire world will use something today that was invented in Seattle. So whether that is Amazon or Microsoft or Starbucks or flying on a Boeing plane, there's a handful of other things. Costco, there's a handful of other things. Half of the world, just imagine that, half of the world will use something that was invented in Seattle. It's an amazing place, and it's also a city of darkness. We're well known for our darkness. I got here at 7:50 a.m., and it was still dark. It was raining, drizzling, just enough to try to put you in a bad mood. It's a dark city. We also have one of the highest depression and suicide rates in the country. We have one of the oldest gay pride parades in the country. Our gay pride parade is 50 years old. We've been doing it for 50 years in this city. We celebrate something called solstice in our city, which is the longest day of the year. It happens around June 21st. And on solstice in Seattle, we have a naked bike ride parade that happens right through the heart of our city, and we have 10,000 participants in the Solstice Day parade. It's a dark city as it comes to churches. So many fallen churches. We're kind of known for having churches that fall, whether that's traditional churches. I mean, just about every traditional church has either stopped believing the Bible or gone entirely social gospel. Also, you probably know some of the stories. Some of the Mars Hill stories or the East Lake story is a fascinating and really sad story to read about. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Church Home, but Church Home used to be a real presence of the local church in our city, and it's just not anymore. It's not completely gone away, but it's changed significantly. We are a dark city. We're an amazing city. We're a beautiful city. And we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk today about mindsets for a post-Christian urban church. And I used to think that this idea or this teaching was like super important because it was foreshadowing or it was forecasting for every city in America. And I thought that 10 years ago. Now, I think most major cities in the United States are already in this category of kind of post-Christian sort of urban church environment. And so now what we're talking about today, it's not really something like this is what's coming, maybe like it was 10 years ago. Now it's like, hey, this is what's here. So no matter what church, no matter what city you people are planning to serve in, where you're serving now or where you're heading out towards, we have to think as the church in the United States like we're in a post-Christian urban context. It's different. It's different than it was 10 years ago. And I know people, at least in Seattle, we're seeing a mass exodus of conservatives and Christians. I mean, basically, the state mandated that you have to be vaccinated if you want to work in several different jobs. So that was one reason. You have to show your vaccine card to eat in restaurants or to shop in shops. And we've had tons of riots and just racial upheaval in our city. Because of that and other reasons, any conservatives that were here, they are fleeing to Idaho, or they're fleeing to Texas, or to Florida, or to Arizona, and doing this attempt to like create these silos where, I don't know, their traditional kind of cultural values can be experienced and expressed. And my question is like, who's going to stay? Who's going to stay? Because There's just as many people in Seattle. We have just as many people moving in as moving out. The city is, in many ways, only getting darker spiritually and as it relates to some of these values. Who's going to stay? And I think that's a question for you as you're heading into wherever you're heading to be the church, to lead the church in the next 20, 30 years. Gosh, like, who's going to stay? Like, who's going to carry the word of God? Who's going to be the church in our generation, no matter what happens culturally around us? So I love questions and really want you to ask questions. It would, especially because I can't even see who I'm talking with. It would help me so much if we could interact a little bit. So I'm really going to talk about three main ideas. Okay, I'm going to break our whole time up, and we'll take a little break after each one and give you a little space, hopefully, to think of and to ask questions. But we're going to talk about identity, we're going to talk about community, and we're going to talk about mission. Identity, community, and mission as it relates to doing urban church, doing post-Christian context church. And so I'll pause after each of those sections and would love it. I mean, gosh, if you don't have a question, make something up. I just would love for us to have some interaction with questions. I really want to talk about what you want to talk about, what you want to hear about. So don't have time for a ton of background, but I want to give you a little bit. I probably don't know many of you. And so just a little bit of background. My name's Andrew. I serve as the lead pastor at Mosaic Community Church here in Seattle, Washington. I went to Baylor many years ago. I just turned 40, which is awesome. I've been waiting to be 40 for a long time. I feel like a legitimate pastor at this point. When I was 28, it was kind of like, you're not old enough. I feel old enough now. I was old enough at 28, but I feel old enough at 40. So that's great. Pumped to be 40. Went to Baylor. Wasn't walking with Jesus in college. Wasn't a part of Antioch in college at all. And then I dropped out of college for a year. And long story, came to know the Lord during that year and came back on fire, re-enrolled in college. Actually, the only reason I went to Baylor was to play football, but that didn't work out, so I quit after a year. And anyway, life got turned around at 22 years old, and when I came back to finish school at Baylor, I found Antioch. And that was my first experience of the church as we know it, and I met the girl that I've now been married to for almost 16 years. That same year, she was brand new to Antioch as well as a junior in college. She grew up Catholic, and so we kind of started our relationship both really new to church as we know it, and it was wonderful. And here we are, some 18 years later, leading this amazing church in the middle of Seattle, Washington. So let me tell you a little bit about Mosaic. Mosaic is one church that has now planted two other churches. So Mosaic in Seattle, we have about 700 people that are part of our church. We meet right in the middle of the city next to what's called Green Lake, which is really an icon in the city. We're in an amazing location. We have about 700 people, and we've planted a church in a suburb to the north that's called Mosaic North. They have about 100 people. And then we just recently, like 6 weeks ago, planted a church to the east, and that's called Mosaic East Side, and we sent out 60 adults and a handful of kids from our church who all live on the east side who were driving in to Seattle to be a part of our church. We sent them out to plant Mosaic East Side. And so we've also sent out a handful of long-term missionaries to Morocco and Mongolia and India. We have another team that's ready to go to Southeast Asia here in the next year or so. And so that's a little bit about our church. My wife and I have been out here and leading for about 13 years now. And so, gosh, this has become home for us. We've had 4 children while we lived here. They are now aged 10, 8, 7, and 5. And they're the best part of my life is my family. Love them so much. So, in Seattle, last little background piece. In Seattle, we're just in the best season we've ever been in as a church. Truly, like we have more momentum here locally than we've ever had, just about on every front. I mean, we're seeing people come to know Jesus. We're doing significant work and mobile outreach to homeless encampments around our city. We have encounter nights once a month where the Spirit of God is filling people and imparting things and just moving heaven and earth when we gather. We have something called Good Times that we've started. Good Times are like inroads for people who would never come to a church. So we're doing basketball, and we're doing tennis, and we're doing board games, and we're doing trivia nights, and there's more to come. Just these kind of like seemingly non-affiliated with our church events and sort of groups that are ways for our church to invite coworkers and friends and family members to go and do something fun so that they can rub shoulders with people who know Jesus. So really an awesome season for us as a church. God's really moving. I would say, just like probably everyone, the last 2 years has been really hard just because of what's happening around us. But in our city, what's being produced is the life of God. We just bought our second building here in Seattle. Our giving is skyrocketing. Our giving hasn't gone down at all the last 2 years. Our numbers are growing. They're not going down. They're not going down at all. Our impact is increasing. And so I know you're hearing probably a lot of really difficult and sad stories, maybe even in your own context. Things are really hard. I would just say this: in some ways, what you're seeing here, I believe, is a foreshadow of what's to come in the U.S. As things get worse, as things get darker, the light shines more brightly. And actually, the kingdom begins to expand in profound ways and in tangible ways. And we're experiencing that in Seattle, and we're only expecting more in the next 20 years. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. So let's start with these three kind of big ideas. First idea I want to talk about for thinking about kind of post-Christian urban text. I want to talk about your identity as a leader, specifically your identity. And I'm sure that through the training school and even through this program you're in now, that you've been inundated with this identity message. It's a core message for the Antioch movement. But gosh, as a lead pastor or as someone in like full-time ministry in a post-Christian urban context, nothing could be more important than your identity. And so I just have to spend just a couple minutes on this. It will never change that the two most important questions in your life are who is God and who am I? And the way you answer those two questions, who is God and who am I, will necessarily lay the foundation and set the course for the rest of your life and ministry. All your relationships, like all of your ministry philosophies, like your health, the decisions that you make, like all of it will actually come out of how you answer these two questions. Who is God and who am I? And so rooting your identity as you are considering or stepping into another level of ministry, like rooting your identity could never be more important. With every transition, you have to reroot. You have to dig deeper. You have to let your roots go further in. Every transition, whether it's a move or a new role or you get married or you have children, every transition in your life is an opportunity for the enemy to come in and confuse your identity. And so I would just offer this to you, like, who is God and who are you are questions that you can never get outside of the top of your mind, because the enemy will attack you there more than anywhere else, because if he can confuse those two questions, then your life and your ministry can begin to unravel from the base or from the foundation. And so I would say in this context, it is vital that your identity and security are not rooted in your success as a pastor or your ministry that's produced out of your life. Your security cannot be your role in ministry. And I know you agree with me, but like that will be tested every year that you're in ministry. And if you, like, I would say it's a secret weapon. It's a secret weapon in my life. Like I don't have any goals. and I say that and people are like, what? No, I don't have goals or like expectations that my identity are dependent on. Like I could rattle off those numbers and those stats about our church, and I could talk about how God's moving, and I'll just say this, like man, 7 years ago, it would have been a completely different situation. 7 years ago, we owned nothing. We had mostly college students and young adults, almost no families. We had no money. We had no stability. We hadn't planted anything. It was a very, very different kind of statistic ministry description 7 years ago. And I don't know, like I can't make you believe this, but I'll just say it. The truth is, my identity, who God was and who I was exactly the same 7 years ago as it is now. I wasn't shaken about who God was or who I was 7 years ago when there was visibly very little fruit. On the same token, I don't feel better about myself. I'm not like more secure or more confident because there's some good things happening in the ministry in the church right now. My identity and my security are not rooted in what is produced through my life. My identity and security are rooted in who God is and who he says that I am. And so you can never get away from that. It's paramount for you. A few things required here in your identity. You've got to have humility, you've got to have boldness, and you've got to have grit. In a post-Christian urban context, I believe the most important leadership trait that a person can have, the leadership trait that every leader is required to carry is humility. You've got to have humility. And it's tied to what we just talked about. Like, being a leader is being a servant. Being a leader is believing God and giving yourself wholeheartedly to what God's called you to do. And in this age of, the last 20 years of, cultural Christianity and what that has looked like, and the pride, the sort of man of God syndrome, the health and wealth associated with the role of a lead pastor or being in ministry, it's destroyed so many churches. It's unraveled so many leaders. As a leader, you've got to be committed to humility. You've got to be broken as a leader. I mean, whenever I'm asked by someone in our church, like, what's impacted your life and ministry the most, I talk about the brokenness. Because in the brokenness, in the hard places, in the promises that haven't yet been fulfilled, in some of the financial and health and just spiritual warfare that we've gone through, in those broken places, I've met him. I've met God in those places. And what that produces is a humility and also a boldness. Humility and boldness are not opposed to one another. They're both required for leadership in a post-Christian church context. So humility, boldness, and then I would say grit. Grit. I would say grit would be a life message of mine. Just don't quit. Just don't quit. Like, when your back's against the wall and everything and everyone, even yourself, is telling you it's over. If you're doing ministry because you believe what God said and he's called you to do it, you can carry grit. And if you can carry humility, boldness, and grit, you become a platform for God to work powerfully through in your life and ministry. So last thing on identity is, I would say, if you can hold on to all of that stuff, and then you can actually embrace the place that God's called you in all the right ways, this is key. Embracing the place. What do I mean by that? Well, when I moved to Seattle, like I said, I played football at Baylor. Big football fan. Love watching football. Love watching the Cowboys. Loved watching Baylor football. Loved to lift weights. I loved to eat Tex-Mex and steak. And I don't know, whatever, it's been so long now. Lots of food, like big portions. And when I moved to Seattle, I needed to embrace Seattle. I didn't want to like hold on to parts of my identity that actually weren't core to who God was calling me to be. So things like my interests, my sports teams, the foods that I prefer, even the language that I use and the way that I interact with people, all of those things don't matter. They don't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. And so if I'm really going to give myself to what God's called me to in this city, what can I do to embrace this city? And so for me, man, I started dressing completely different. I mean, look at me. I don't know if you can, I have like all black on, and I just like, I'm not like a trendy person at all, but I want to embrace the place where God's called me. And so I had to change. I had to stop dressing like a Texan. My portion sizes shrunk tremendously. I lost 20 pounds the first year that I lived in Seattle. Like, I had to change my diet, my interests. Man, I hardly watch football. If I do watch football, you know who I watch? The Seahawks and the University of Washington. Those are my teams. I have all the gear. I got rid of all my Texas gear. I don't follow Texas teams. I don't talk about Texas teams. 13 years later, I hardly care about Texas teams. I love the Seahawks. I love the University of Washington. My kids are like, man, Dad, did you go to the UW? No, I didn't go, but this is who we support. I'm a runner now. I run like marathons and long distance. I wear like short little running shorts and like running hats and I have like a running jacket. I'm trying to embrace. I've changed how I interact with people. I feel like my memory of Texas was everybody's so kind and smiley and nice all the time. So you like walk into a store and it's like, hey, how's it going? Hey, how you doing? Good. How are you? Good. And you have this nice, hospitable. People don't do that here. Like if you do that, you stick out. And so I walk in and I just look at people and I'm like, because that, like, I'm acculturating myself. I'm actually connecting by embracing that. Now, I'm still looking for inroads to have conversations, but I'm doing it in a culturally appropriate way. One last thing on this, I've become a homesteader. So what does this mean? This means that we have 5 garden beds in our garden at our home. We grow so many vegetables, it would blow your mind. Like, I'm not a gardener. I grew up in like a suburb of San Antonio. We buy our food at H-E-B. Like, what are you talking about? But not now. Now we go out during the spring and summer and into the fall, and we go out and we pick vegetables from our garden and we make a salad. I have 8 chickens that live on my property. We hardly buy eggs at the store. Instead, we go outside and we give the compost from the day before to the chickens and we collect fresh eggs. I have 2 goats that live in my backyard. 2 Nigerian dwarf goats, like actual goats. We have a pen that I built. Now, you got to understand, I live in the city. Like, I live in the urban context. Like, we don't have a huge yard by any means. Our yard is basically consumed by chickens, goats, and this garden that we have. And, like, why? Well, it's fun. The kids are excited about it. It provides some great chores and some training, but also it connects me with my city. I'm a hero in my city because I'm a homesteader. It's unbelievable. I sent a letter to all of our neighbors with 3 fresh eggs, some arugula from our garden, and I wrote a 1-page letter that talks about earth care and the benefits of homesteading. And hey, this is why we're doing it, and everybody's got to do their part, you see this language. And I wrote, and our neighbors, like, they think we're heroes. They think we're heroes. They think we're saving the earth. Why? Like, why do I do that? Gosh, that connects me with my city. We take our goats for walks, like around the streets of our home. We have a leash and collars. We go with our kids. We walk them. Every car stops. Every pedestrian stops, and they're like, are those goats? That is so awesome. I mean, so easy. It's so easy. I'm acculturating. I'm embracing the place where I live. I'm doing everything I can do to connect with the heart of the city without losing my core identity and my convictions. So identity is so important. Who are you on the inside? Like, who is God and who are you? And then on the outside, like, are you willing to give up all the things that don't really define you? All the things even that you like. Are you willing to give up things that you like so that you can see God move in ways that you love and that you were made for? And for us, we just decided to do it, and I think it's made a huge difference for our community, for our place in this community, for how we connect with people. So that's identity, and I want to pause there, give you like 1 minute to come up with some questions. So try to come up with a few questions, and we'll talk about what you want to talk about on identity specifically.
All right, we have some questions that have come in. First, maybe the most important, what are the names of the goats?
The names of the goats. One is Jubilee, and the other is Little Bear. And so we have Jubilee is a girl. We plan this spring to impregnate her and sell the babies and then start milking Jubilee. We're going to create some cheese and some yogurt and some protein shakes that we'll hopefully, give away or maybe even sell. And the other one's name is Little Bear. Little Bear is a male that has been weathered, is the goat term for this, which means he's still a male, but you wouldn't know it by his outer parts any longer. So you're not allowed to have a male goat in the city. But anyway, there you go. Great question. Love that.
One question says, can you speak more to the way that humility and boldness go together? In what ways has boldness come out of your humility or vice versa?
Yeah. Gosh. So I think humility comes out through, humility is not thinking, this is such a overstated thing, but humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So it really is tied to that like servant mentality. There's a big difference between being a king and a servant in my community. Here at Mosaic, I'm either going to think of myself as a king or I'm going to think of myself as a servant. And how I think about myself will determine how I spend my time and how I interact with people and what I expect from others. And so I want to lay down my life. Like I want to be a servant, which impacts who I spend time with and the way I spend time with them. And it impacts the way I respond when people share things with me. It impacts the amount of time that I'm willing to work and to give towards God building this community. So, but then I think in humility, I'm seeking to come under people. I'm seeking to serve people. I want to be a good listener. I want to ask questions and listen to the people, whether they're in our church or in our city. And at the same time, when I have an opportunity to speak the truth or hold to the truth, I want to do that with boldness. Humility doesn't mean hiding in our city and just surviving. We're going to talk about that a little bit with community. But God calls us to both, to carry humility and to carry boldness. And gosh, you actually see the New Testament church, both in Acts and in Paul's letters, praying for this. Like praying for humility, actively choosing humility, also praying for boldness and actively choosing boldness. And so you need both. Don't get confused and think, well, I'm a bold person or I'm a humble person. No, you're a person of God, and you're called to walk in humility and boldness for the rest of your life and ministry.
So good. This next question kind of summarizes a couple that have been asked. What are seasonal rhythms that you practice to be aware of where you are finding your identity and if you're in a place of humility or arrogance?
Totally. So seasonal rhythms. It begins and ends with your time with God. This is not a time with God teaching, but there is no replacement. There will never be a replacement for getting up in the morning and connecting with the Father. Like whatever you need to do, for me to make that happen, I have to wake up right now at 5:15. It's the only way. I don't like to wake up at 5:15. I'm not really a morning person, but if I'm gonna connect with God, I got to wake up at 5:15. So there's a daily rhythm of time with God that is non-negotiable. Seasonally, though, a big thing for me has been New Year's vision is super important for me. It's so funny. If you were to look through all my journals and all my online docs, you would find at the beginning of every year, I reset my priorities. Like, all right, what are the most important things? And I think that over 13 years, the list the list would be almost exactly the same every year. It's almost exactly the same list. But what happens at the beginning of the year is I choose it again. Like I choose those again. It's not that they're new or anything, but I consciously in my heart, I'm like, no, these are really my priorities. And then those priorities set everything. They set how I spend my time. They set who I'm praying for. They set like the calendar for the ministry year. I mean, it's out of that heart decision that is once a year to hear the Lord and seek Him for my priorities. That, gosh, like the year is shaped for my life. So that's important. Date night with my wife has been so important. We've tried so hard to do it every single week, and also to have an administrative meeting, which maybe sounds funny, but so I try to have a date and a meeting with my wife every week, and that is in part how God's kept us married. I mean, these things are just massively important. We've also tried to do a getaway once a quarter, just like one night. Once a quarter away has been super helpful for us when we've been able to do that. And gosh, like having people that know you. You know, I have a team of people around me. They're actually, most of them don't live here, but they are around me, and they've been the same for over 10 years. And I check in with them, and they know me, and they are a place where I can be honest about. I was almost honest with you. I called one of them 2 weeks ago, and I just was like, "Blah!" You know, just like, this is what I'm feeling and thinking, and this is what I'm doing. And it's so helpful, you know, to have people that you can turn the light on with, because when you turn the light on, the enemy gets exposed, and it's not as scary, it's not secretive, it's not as heavy, it just becomes exposed for what it is, and then you can make changes, you can tell it to go away. So I would say every 3 weeks, I'm having a conversation with one of those people that's around me. I also have a couple of people locally that I have the same type of relationship with. They're on our elder team, and I'm able to talk with them about anything and be open with them and do so regularly. So, yeah, I think that's what I'll share for now. What else?
Would you say that the disenculturation from city of origin and embrace of the city you're called to is a key indicator of the way you've been received over the years?
100%. 100%. And I've seen the opposite fail over and over and over. And there's so many church plants in Seattle. I probably meet 5 new church planters every year, and almost none of them stay. And what they try to do is they try to recreate whatever they were feeling and experiencing somewhere else, usually in the South, and they try to recreate that in Seattle. And it's not that we disagree on core doctrines, it's that we totally are not aligned on cultural integration. And so what happens is they try to produce a southern church in the middle of Seattle. And they get a few people who maybe just moved here who are looking for a southern church here in Seattle, but they don't reach anybody, and they don't grow, and they never fit in. And they actually, what happens is you start to hate the place where you're called. And I've experienced this going back to Waco at times over the years. People think of me as a missionary, and they're like, "Man, you're just like so awesome. You're just like totally in a foreign land, and you're just kind of surviving." And I'm like, actually, I love Seattle. It's my home. Like, I am a Seattleite. Like, I was so excited when I was here 10 years because I started to really call myself a local. Like, I live here. I'm called here. This is my home. I've embraced this. And I think it has been absolutely key for us to have any success, but also for my own heart and relationships, and just to have a place in the city would be to adopt anything I can adopt that doesn't break my convictions. I just want to adopt it because, like, the truth is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like I'm given. Like it's over. When I said yes, it was all of my likes are not mandatory. They're not required. Man, if I get to go back to Texas and have enchiladas and chips and salsa, like you eat a whole bag of chips and salsa before you even get the meal, that's great. If I get to go back and do that, that's awesome, and I'll have a great time, and I'll feel really sick afterwards. I still like those things, but those things aren't mandatory for me to find happiness in life. And so I just let them go. And I think it's made a huge difference in Seattle.
Two more. You touched on this briefly with your previous answer, but how unique in Seattle is Mosaic's church? In other words, are there a good amount of other churches similar to Mosaic in the area?
I love this question. Cortland, I bet you could answer this question. Let me just be honest with you, all right? I'm going to be 100% honest with you. There's no other church like Mosaic in Seattle. How about that? Not one. Not one! And I'm not excited about that. It breaks my heart. If you want to come plant a church in Seattle, let's talk. Because there just aren't any. There are a few churches that believe the same things that we believe, but again, some of their practices, mostly around being charismatic, don't line up. So there's none. And some of you don't believe me. That's okay. Let me just try to prove this to you. So, you guys heard of Bethel? You ever heard of Bethel? Yeah, sure you have. Bethel was going to send a mission trip and find a partnership in our city, and they've done this twice. They did this once about 10 years ago, and then they did it again this year. And they scoured over all the land looking for a church to partner with in Seattle, and they told us this. They couldn't find any. The only one that they could find was us. And so could they partner with us? Totally did. Great. And then the same year, this year, Upper Room, same exact thing. We're going to come. We're going to be partnered. The first email was, we're going to be partnering with a bunch of churches in Seattle. Awesome. Pumped for that. And we'd like for you to be one of them. That'd be great. We'd love to do that. They emailed us back about a month later, and they were like, hey, actually, there aren't any other ones. So could we just use your building every day and hang out with you guys and come to all your services and your stuff? And I was like, yeah, totally, of course. There are not any. There aren't any. There's a couple of Acts 29 churches that we're really close with, and we appreciate them and are so thankful for them, but they're very different from us. There's a couple of independent kind of just community churches that I'm really good friends with them and supportive of them and really pray and give towards their success in the city, but they're not like us either. So if you're talking about in the city, now you go out, you want to drive out 20 or 30 miles, yes, you can start to find some great churches that are a lot like Mosaic. But in the city, which Seattle is very kind of prideful about this, you're either in the city or you're not. So in the city, which has about 800,000 people, as far as I know, we're it. And that breaks my heart. And it's part of why our strategy is to plant churches, because we don't want to be a mega church. We have no illusions that, even if we got to be 2,000 people in the city, that would really impact the city for the kingdom. We think it's lots of little communities, lots of little churches that are going to lead to citywide impact. And so we want to send out, once we get to 600, we start thinking about the next church. So we're already there. We're at 700. We just sent out one. We're at 700. We're already thinking about the next one, because we have to see more local churches and communities established in our city. So that's what we're after.
How would you encourage someone in their mid-20s to keep pressing in ministry, but also continuing to progress in life with things like kids, school, etc.?
I would suggest that you give up all of your me time. So I know, and hopefully somebody will help with like healthy boundaries and Sabbath, and these are really wonderful things, and I'm very supportive of them. But there's a difference between healthy rhythms and Sabbath and me time. And what falls under the category of me time? Tons of things could. It could be watching movies. It could be video games. It could be long, exotic meals that you prepare, for yourself. It could be some form of exercise. There's all sorts of things that actually aren't part of Sabbath and enrichment and refreshment for you. They're actually just me time. And the truth is, the window for me time just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So you're single and you're single in ministry, you should give up some of your me time. You get married, you lose more me time. You start having kids, you lose more me time. You have multiple kids, you lose more me time. You decide to get a master's, you lose more me time. Like, you don't have any. You have no me. And if you're willing and able to do that, then you will continue and you focus on personal things that are actually refreshment. Like, rest is intended to make you run faster. Rest is not about like you getting yours. Rest is about refreshing you so that you can run. You weren't made to just veg out. You were made to run. And so you need to rest, but you need to rest so that you can run. You don't run so that you can rest. And I think the American dream created this idea that like you work really hard so that you can veg out. You work really hard for 60 years so that you can retire. You work really hard 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, so that you can do whatever you want on the weekends. You run so that you can rest. That's not kingdom. Kingdom is you make sure to rest appropriately so that you can give your life away, so that you can run. And so that it's a mindset shift. But if you can get there, then 20s, 30s, kids, school, man, God will give you grace for what he's called you to do. He just will. So if you're getting married and having kids and going to school and doing ministry and working another job, if you're doing all of those things out of a sense of calling because you're believing God's calling you to do that and that's a yes to God, then I have no doubt that there will be tremendous, abundant grace for you to do everything that you're called to do. That's just how the kingdom works. So if you're living out of your yes and your calling, there's abundant grace for you to do everything and more in your life.
Last one. Did you take time when you first moved to Seattle to figure out what your ministry should look like, or did you start and then morph as you went?
I should have taken more time, but no, we started. We just started right away. It's a longer story than I have time for, but I would say I'm of the philosophy that ministry truly it's on the job training. Like you learn as you go, and you get refined through the fire, and the pain and the mistakes are actually what mold you. What does Gandalf say? Those of you who like Lord of the Rings, he says, the burned hand teaches best. And so, you can plan and study and learn, but really you're going to learn the best by trying and making mistakes, by reaching your hand out for something and realizing, whoops, that's a fire, and now I have burned my hand. And I'm not going to stick my hand in that direction anymore because there's a fire, and that hurts. And so I would say we've certainly learned and grown mostly through trial and error more than a glorious plan. Now, we certainly learn things, and we plant churches differently than when we started, but even those church plants are learning by fire. So there we go. Good stuff. Great. Thanks for those questions. I feel loved. Even if you didn't want to know those things, I feel like you care. So thank you so much. Okay, so identity. Let's talk about community. Let's talk about community for a minute. And I'm gonna share a few principles and steps and stories that have helped shape how we think about our community in an urban post-Christian context. So first I would say we absolutely think about Orthodox Christianity over cultural Christianity. We think about Orthodox Christianity. We think more about the New Testament church and the tenets and essence of Christianity and how that is played out now. We think way more about that than we think about what other churches are doing and what is culturally relevant and what's going to connect kind of our church community with the world. There has been so much cultural Christianity the last 50 years in the United States, and I think it's over. I believe that nominal Christianity, cultural Christianity, is over. It's definitely over in Seattle. It ended a long time ago, and I think it's over where you are too. I think you're going to see that played out in the next 10 years. So what does that mean? Like a lot of the practices, a lot of the spaces, a lot of the strategy for local church in America is not going to work anymore, because actually what it was playing into was cultural Christianity, not Orthodox Christianity. And so if I was going to like put something in you as a church planter or kind of a new pastor in a post-Christian context, I would say, like, for your community, pursue Orthodox Christianity. And I want to talk about what I mean by that a little bit more. I think Orthodox Christianity, it really, like, it has its roots in doctrine. Like, what does your community believe, and how is that belief expressed and experienced inside your community, and therefore, how is it on display for the city in which you're placed? And I just pray that you wouldn't be naive, and you wouldn't be idealistic, how I was, kind of in some of the early years. Obviously, one of the key questions in our generation has to do with sexuality and gender, right? Like, I don't even have to explain that. You know that's true. And so every generation has a stance. Every generation has like a doctrinal battle that they go through, and ours happens to be sexuality and gender. And so Orthodox Christianity means being clear and carrying humility and compassion as it relates to the doctrine that we have to stand on in our generation. So don't be naive and don't be idealistic. And what I mean by that is don't try to connect with the culture by hiding or minimizing or massaging what you believe about the main doctrine that the enemy is attacking in our generation. What I mean is, in the beginning, we didn't put on our website what our church believed about sexuality. We just didn't put it on there. Like, we didn't put our doctrine on our website because I didn't want to put up a wall with anyone who might hop on our website that would see that and be like, oh, no, I'm not doing that because of that belief. I didn't want to do that. I wanted an environment where anyone and everyone felt like they could come, they were loved, like they'd be accepted. And I thought, love and acceptance first. You know, what do they say? Like, belong before you become. Like, right? Like, be accepted, be hugged, be welcomed first, and then they'll have an encounter with Jesus. And then when they have an encounter with Jesus, then, supernaturally, the Holy Spirit will convict them, And then after that happens, then they'll say, Andrew, I actually believe maybe that the Bible's true about sexuality and gender. And then I could say, yeah, totally. That's what we believe too. Isn't that wonderful? And I really thought this way. And so we would get emails from people that would say, what does your church believe about homosexuality? Or people would ask our team, and we would literally just try to delay and hide. Be like, oh, we just love everybody and just really believe the Bible, but we believe the Bible is culturally relevant. And inside, we were holding to the scriptures, but we tried to paint this picture on the outside that we kind of weren't, in the name of evangelism. And I would just say that it doesn't work. It's actually not loving at all, because what happens is people do come and they do feel loved and accepted, and they do start to make real relationships, and they start to define this as their community, their home, but they don't realize that there's a doctrine that we wholeheartedly believe that is different from what they believe. And so it comes out. And when it comes out, it's way angrier, way messier, way more hurtful. It rips apart real relationships in a way that could have been avoided if we had just been more clear on the front end. Now, I just want to say one more thing, and then I want to show you a quick video. So this doesn't mean that with my neighbors, or if, in the workplace or on the street, this doesn't mean that we wear our doctrine on a t-shirt, and inside of our first conversation with our neighbors, we're going to make sure that they know what we believe about the whole Bible and what. No. Man, ministry outside of our church, I'm going to get to that, mission, this is very different. What I'm talking about is inside the community. The way you think, the way you interact, the way you communicate, what it means to be a part of the community, and even how you sort of market your community, it needs to be clear. It needs to be unwavering Orthodox Christianity. And any idea that you're going to, and I know some of you probably think this way, and it's okay, be blessed, but it's not going to work. Any way that you're oh, we're going to go more of a seeker out, I don't think it's going to work. I think you're being over-idealistic, and you're trying to control something that you're not meant to control. As it relates to your community, you're meant to be orthodox, which means hold to the tenets, what you believe as a community is clear and is carried with great humility and great compassion. And so I want to show you a video, and the reason I want to show you this is to open your eyes, maybe for some of you, to what's actually happening inside the post-Christian urban context. In Washington State, for example, a curriculum was passed about 5 years ago that mandates every school in the state of Washington to include homosexuality and transgender education as a part of elementary education. So if you're a school in Washington, you do not have an option. You have to include this specific curriculum. And what it includes is a book for each grade level beginning in kindergarten. So in kindergarten, there's a book and a set of questions and discussion points that every kindergartner is presented with in Washington. And the book is intended to help the kindergartner think about gender the way that the world is promoting we should think about gender, and even to decide what gender they actually are. There's a process for elementary school students mandated by the state where children are presented the question and decision point of what gender are you really? And I know some of you are yeah, I know about that. They made a video that is on Seattle Public Schools website. You can go find every grade level's video. I want to show you about 2 or 3 minutes of the kindergarten video. So this is the video created for kindergarten classrooms in Seattle. Kindergartners, 5-year-olds. Think of a 5-year-old. This is for them, and I want to show you that. It's going to be about 2 or 3 minutes. Are we ready, Cortland, for that? Awesome. All right, watch this.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Brennan Ham, and I'm the Health Education Specialist and Trainer for Seattle Public Schools. I prefer my name to pronouns, but anything said with respect is great, so they, she, and he all work for me. I'm very excited to be here with you today because we are going to read a fabulous book called Introducing Teddy. The full title is Introducing Teddy, a gentle story about gender and friendship. This is written by Jessica Walton and illustrated by Dougal McPherson. Now take a look at this picture. We see here on the cover of this book a really sad-looking teddy. This teddy has a little sad face and has a bow tie. We see a mirror here, and then we see a teddy with a bow and a really big happy face. So what do you think this story might be about? I'm very excited to share it with you. It's a very special story. Now, before we begin, I would like to cover some important words that'll really help us understand this story better. Now, the first word is acceptance. Take a moment and think, when have you heard the word acceptance before? The second word is compassion. When have you heard the word compassion before? Take a moment and think, what does compassion mean? And now that third word is gender. Take a moment and think, what does gender mean? Where have you heard it before or seen it? The fourth word is gender role. When have you heard or considered what gender role might mean? Where have you seen it? And the fifth and final word that we're going to talk about today is the word unique. What does unique mean? Again, take a moment to consider those words. And what I'm going to do is share with you our Seattle Public Schools definition for kindergarten for each of these words. The first word, acceptance. Acceptance means being supportive, kind or friendly to others, accepting other people and their differences, and being okay with something.
All right. Like I said, that's 2 minutes of a 20-minute video, and there's a kindergarten. There's one for every grade, and don't watch them. I've watched all of them. I hope that helps you understand the nature of the agenda that is happening in our city, in our state, and honestly, in a state coming to you. This is an indoctrination led by the enemy. I'm not mad at that guy. I'm not mad at the president of Seattle Public Schools or whatever. Honestly, this is the enemy. This is the battle for our generation, is this doctrine of sexuality and gender. And so don't be naive. Part of your community is intended to express Orthodox Christianity in a way that is humble, that's also bold, that's unwavering, and in a way that really shocks the place in which your community resides. I have so many stories that I could share. I don't want to take all the time sharing stories. I'll give you a few highlights for us. Several years ago, the way I was kind of shocked out of this naive approach was when I realized suddenly on one Sunday that half of our college leaders didn't believe the same things that we believed as a church. I made a comment inside of a sermon. I don't think that sermons are the best place. I don't think Sunday morning sermons are the best place to do a lot of teaching on sexuality and gender because it can be so misconstrued. But occasionally, we talk about it on a Sunday. And I talked about it on a Sunday, and there was an upheaval that happened in our college ministry. And long story short, for the next 3 years, it was a Christian school that most of these leaders were at. They were ravenously attacking us. I mean, they were printing out text messages that some of our staff was sending, printing them out on poster boards and putting them around the school. They were sending all kinds of letters and emails and even showing up dressed even more aggressively than that guy on the video, on purpose, to bring disruption to our services. And so that was not a good day when I realized that my ignorance had created a community that didn't have a clear conviction. It wasn't clear. It may have been clear in my heart, clear in the hearts of our staff, but it wasn't clear in our community, and so we had kind of turned the ship upside down. Another story, we had a life group leader who kind of internally just changed his position on what he believed about sexuality and gender. It's a long story, but he ended up officiating a gay wedding. And so I didn't know he had changed his position. I don't think really hardly anyone knew. But then he officiated a gay wedding, and it went on. It was Facebook. It was on all over Facebook, and it's a big problem because all the other leaders and many of our church and our staff, all knew this person, and then saw like a Rolodex of photos, and the person that the two women that he was officiating their wedding, both had been serving in one of our ministries a couple of years before. And so that was something. And then last really quick story I want to mention is just, we had a guy when we started to make the change towards clarity. We had a guy come visit. We'd put what we believed on our website, and we just were being much more clear at membership class, and with our life group leaders, we were being much more clear about what we believed and how we carried that out. And we had a guy come visit, and he came a few times, and he would come in by himself, and I would say, like, I thought, I would say that I guessed that he was in like a gay community just by sort of a little bit of how he dressed. But he would just come in and sit through a Sunday service and leave. And I finally, after like the third week, I caught him before he left, and we had a conversation, and I was like, hey, I'd love to get time with you. Like, do you want to go for a walk or get a coffee or something? And he agreed to that. And so we went for an hour-long walk together, and we talked about, we shared stories and shared personal things, but he never brought up anything about sexuality, and I didn't ask anything. So it just never came up. So we had this pretty deep hour-long conversation where it never came up, and I was kind of like, well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see kind of where this goes. He came back again the next week, and he brought 4 friends with him. So now there's these 5 guys, and they're all attending our service, and man, they seem engaged in everything happening. And after that, the guy that I knew that I had walked with, he texted me and said, hey, I'd love to grab lunch. Do you want to grab lunch? I said, yeah, I'd love to grab lunch. So I go meet him downtown for lunch, and when I thought it was just he and I, but when I showed up, it was all 5 of these guys. And so we're sitting at a table having lunch together, and they're like, hey, we really wanted to have lunch because we had some questions for you. And I said, oh, yeah, totally. And they said, hey, we love your church. We think that what you guys are doing is awesome. We love the community. Man, we really want to be a part of it. We just have a question for you. We noticed on your website that it says that you believe in a traditional biblical view of sexuality. And what we want to know is, do you really believe that? Because we are all 5 gay men, and we're activists in the city, and we love your church, and we want to be a part of your church. And so we're wondering, like, do you just have that doctrine on your website because you're a part of Antioch and, like, you're supposed to have that doctrine? Because we know that happens sometimes in denominations and churches. They just sort of have to hold to this posted doctrine, but internally, they don't really believe that. And so we wanted to know, we can just tell you're a loving person. We can tell you have a vibrant community. Do you really actually believe what your doctrine says? And I thought, yeah, wow, And so, for the next 15 or 20 minutes, I lovingly and in a very honoring and very humble way, as best I could, expressed that, yeah, totally. I started with my story. I was like, well, I have to tell you my story. And anyway, I got to the end and said, yeah, we do. We believe what the Bible teaches about sexuality. And the guys looked sad. They were like really sad. They weren't angry. They were sad. And they said, man, that's really disappointing. And I said, guys, there's lots of churches in our city. In fact, I think most churches in our city that have changed their belief on sexuality. You guys should go check out one of those. Like go check out one of those churches that celebrates homosexuality. And you know what they said? They said, yeah, we've done that. We've been to like almost all of them. And I was like, oh, well, what was wrong? What was wrong with those churches? And they said something that like shook my ministry. Like it like firmed up something and shook some things off. They said, yeah, in those churches, Jesus is not the center. Homosexuality and social agenda is the center. And we're looking for a place where Jesus is the center, but homosexuality is accepted. And in those churches, homosexuality has become the center, and Jesus is on the side. And I was like, guys, why do you think that is? And they were like, we don't know. And I left it there. Like I didn't try to answer it for them. We ended. I was like, man, well, it's really great to have lunch with you guys. And if you ever, have any questions or want to meet up again, I'd love to. You can always, come visit. And we had a great ending. And I haven't seen him since. That reality that when you change one of the main doctrines in Orthodox Christianity, Jesus is no longer the center of the church. It's like the Spirit gets sucked out of the church. And I've still been waiting. I've asked this question so many times for years. Show me a church that's vibrant and alive and impacting the city for God's kingdom that has changed their position. Show me one. Just show me one. Give me one example. Not just one that's changed, but one that's changed and that is vibrant and being led by Jesus and impacting the city. And nobody has been able to show me one. Maybe you know of one. I'd love to see it, sincerely. I haven't found one. It's because it's a big lie, actually. It's a big lie that you can change an Orthodox doctrine and keep Jesus at the center. Once you change an Orthodox doctrine, just one, you're susceptible to changing any of them. And suddenly you just become this gathering of people around whatever they want to be and gather around. And that's not Christianity. That's not the church. And so I want to just share a few community steps that we've taken to help be an Orthodox church in our city, and then give a little space for questions. So first thing is membership for us is huge. It's huge. I think more than any other Antioch church, we take membership super duper seriously because membership provides an opportunity for people to decide if they really want to be a part of the church. In every church, you've got three groups of people. You've got visitors, you've got fans, and you've got members. Visitors, just what it is, first-time visitor. They're just coming to check it out. Great, we love visitors. We have visitors every week. A fan is a person that really likes the church. They're a big fan of it. Like, this is awesome. I enjoy this. I receive from this church. This is great. They're a fan. A member is someone who is a part of the church. For us, membership is crucial because when a person goes from a fan to a member, they are embracing, they are becoming a part of the body. They're not looking at the body, they're becoming an arm on the body. And so when that happens, one, we really emphasize that, and two, we make membership class super duper clear about what we believe. I try to talk people out of joining our church. I am like, hey, our last membership class, I think we had like 40 people. And I was like, hey, look, we're going to read this doctrine out loud all together. Then I'm going to talk about it. If there's something in this doctrine that you don't believe, like you know it, please don't join our church. Go find a church that you can be a part of that you believe, because really we're just a sum, we're a body around the person of Jesus and what we believe about him. And so membership's been huge for us. Man, having a process that gears towards the parade that is society in 2021. The parade. In every major city, there's a parade coming through at all times. What that means is that, man, there's people coming in. We're so migrant, right? Our age, we're just moving constantly. There's always a parade. There's people coming in. There's people kind of in the middle that are living there, and then there's people on their way out. So our approach to minister to the parade needs a clear process. And for us, that clear process is having a clear next step. Like what we want for the parade, it's undeniable. Like you're going to have a few people that will stay with you for a lifetime. The vast majority of everybody else will come in, be with you for a little bit, and move out. I wish it wasn't so. It just is. So what are you trying to do to minister to this parade in your community? How do you do that? For us, we think, man, if we can get everybody to take the next step in their journey with Jesus, we're ministering to the parade. So we've lined out 5 clear steps. We adopted these from All People's Church. We call them the 5 phases of following Jesus. I think we have a graphic for you. It is a decision, like clear decision point. You sit down with a new person and you ask the question, when did you make a decision to follow Jesus? And you'll find a lot of people will say, I just always sort of have, okay, so you haven't made a decision. So that's actually step 1 for you. Make a decision to follow Jesus. Step 2, after you've made that decision, be dunked. This is clear. This is biblical. We talk about this in our members class. If you haven't been dunked, but you've made a decision, you're in disobedience, right? The D you never want to be in, right? So decision, dunked, and then these other 3, discipled, delivered, and deployed, these become ongoing in the life of the believer. And so when this parade comes through our city and through our community, we're thinking, how can we get every person to make the next step so that when they go to the next location, they're further with Jesus than when they started? So I'm not saying the D's are the way to go. I'm just saying you need a process that's easy and clear and that then filters the ministries that you provide. This filters everything we do. Like, why do we do Christmas? Why do we do a Christmas Eve service? We don't do a Christmas Eve service just because you're supposed to do a Christmas Eve service. We do a Christmas Eve service because that's an opportunity for people to make a decision to follow Jesus. So that sets the tone for our Christmas Eve service. It empowers us to do all the things, all the advertising, whatever it is that we're doing, because we're thinking, gosh, get people to do a decision. We baptize once a month on Sundays. Whether there's people to be baptized or not, we set up a tank and we're ready for it because, gosh, like being dunked is, we want that to be a clear, knowable process for people in our church, et cetera, et cetera. You have to have a process that you're taking the parade through. Otherwise, they're just going to hang out with you. And that will be fun, but you won't help them grow while they're a part of your community. So that's been huge for us. Some of the changes in our service reflect this Orthodox movement that the church is a part of. For instance, we take communion very seriously. We receive communion every single service that we join together. We do it at the end of worship. So for us, right now we start with thankfulness or testimonies. Then we go into some worship with music. By the way, we don't have a stage. It's very light in our room. We have windows onto a major street in our city. It's a very simple setup. We're not doing bells and whistles and smoke and spotlights and all kinds of these things because I think those are cultural and I think those are over. We're doing simple setup and appearance, and then so we do that testimony, Thanksgiving, we do worship, and then we do communion. Like the pinnacle moment of the service typically is that end of worship. Everybody that can be is just really focused on Jesus. We take that moment and we do a serious, like 7-minute communion where everybody walks up, we explain what communion is, and we turn off all the music. Everybody, the band, everybody in the room, there's no music, there's no sound, it's quiet, and together as a community we receive the body of Christ, we receive the blood of Christ. It's a sacrament. It's a powerful moment that's not created by music or anything else, for emotional effect. The power in the moment is created by the sacrament. It's created by the fact that all hearts are focusing on Jesus and we're receiving that. So we do communion. We do a message, but our message ends with activation. I mean, we are activating as a church. Like, we get up and move around the room, and we write letters, and we text people, and we get on our face and pray. I mean, we activate the message in the moment. And then after we activate the message, we all stand and we sing the doxology in a cappella. And what that does, again, it unifies us in that moment. There's no one leading. It's just we're all in a cappella as a congregation singing the doxology. And that does something for our community. We're taking a few small steps, analog steps, if you will, like church in real life, like real people, real sacraments, real worship, real unity, like real life, because we're trying to connect our people with like Orthodox Christianity, with analog church. And so we're also taking some steps like completely getting off social media. I don't know anyone else that's doing this. I'm not recommending this. I'm not saying that you should do this. But if you go to our Instagram page right now, if you're on Instagram, you'll find Mosaic Community Church. We have a page, but you'll find no pictures. And we're in a process of removing ourselves from social media. And actually, we're gonna keep our accounts, but we're going to use that to point people towards our website, which is something that we actually can control. And there's lots of reasons for this, but again, it's primarily this movement that we feel towards analog church, towards Orthodox Christianity. So that's what we're doing. What else? I think that's good for community. So why don't we take a little 1-minute break? I want to be sure to get to mission, which is the last piece. But any questions on community specifically? Cortland is nodding her head. What do we got?
Billy would love some more info on how we do membership course and what that process looks like.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to do membership. For us, we do approximately once every 2 months, and we have it's about a 2-hour meeting together where we walk through history, vision, structure of our church. We read through that doctrine. I try to talk people out of joining, and we have lunch together. We get tacos from a street taco place, amazing. We all have tacos together, and then we say, hey, so from this point on, you have 30 days to decide to become a member. We send them an online form. If they want to become a member, all they have to do is fill out the online form, and then one of our pastors gets a one-on-one with them after that, just to help make sure that they know what they're doing and that they want to be a member. And then after that, they become a member. And that triggers, they come to member meetings. They are able to serve in several different capacities in our church that you have to be a member to serve in. They get special member communication, letters and emails. They are brought in early to big events and big communications as a church. We just try to treat them as a part of our church. We bring them into big decisions. We don't vote, but we try to do surveys and we try to get feelers. Like, what do people think? Like, what are you guys after? What do you believe God's saying? So that's membership.
When it comes to sexuality discipleship, how do you discern that you are talking to a non-believer who comes to church sometimes versus a believer who holds an unorthodox view of Christian sexuality?
What was the beginning? Sorry.
When it comes to sexuality discipleship,
okay,
how do you discern the difference?
So I don't know if you're meaning like a person already in our community. Like, remember that those classifications, visitor, fan, member. I want to be as loving, as relational, as fun, embracing. Like, let's get together on everything we can get together on. And when those things come up interpersonally, I'm very clear. I'm very clear. and trying to keep our staff very clear and our leaders very clear. You have to keep talking about it. Like, I don't have to keep talking about why baptism is important. I talk about that like once every month or so. If, when we do baptism, we mention it in the membership class, but I don't have to keep talking about that because baptism's not under attack in our generation. What's under attack is the doctrine of sexuality and gender. So that just means I have to stay fresh on it, and I have to keep talking about it with our leaders, because inevitably it will be the thing that comes up as the dividing line for people again and again and again. And I mean, really, you have to understand it's the most loving thing to do. I've never kicked anyone out of our church. I've never told someone you can't be here anymore. I've never said you can't be a part of our church anymore. What I have to help people understand is that if they don't believe what we believe, they don't want to be here anymore. They don't want they don't want to be a part of a church that actively is carrying and reflecting a belief that they don't have. So I've had a lot of really wonderful, sad, highly emotional conversations and moments with people that I know and love, where we have hugged and said goodbye on as good a terms as we could because they don't believe what the Bible teaches. And I'll give you a tool that was given to me, really helpful. And it's a question to ask someone when this conversation comes up. If there's someone either on the street or who's a part of our church who either because of their own desire to engage in homosexuality, or just because of a family member or a friend who is gay, who they kind of feel like they're fighting for, however it gets, if you get in a situation and you're talking interpersonally about this, here's a question to ask. And it's really powerful. The question is this: is it possible for me to still love you and disagree with you on the topic of homosexuality? Is it possible? Is it possible for me to love you and for us to disagree? And I've used this question many times, and it's never failed me. And there's always a long pause. And if the answer to the question is yes, it's possible. It's possible for you to love me and for us to disagree. Then I'm like, great. That's where I'm at. Like, I love you. I just disagree. I disagree with you. It's a non-negotiable for me. And that leads to, like, where do we go from here in this place of love and care and understanding and disagreement? Where do we go? If the answer to that question is no, it's not possible for you to love me and for us to disagree on this. What they're saying is that their identity has become this. Like, it is not possible. If it's not possible, then the conversation's over. Because if they acknowledge it's not possible, I'm going to be attempting to, like, demonstrate love and be caring and be compassionate and be full of grace, but still holding to the conviction that the Bible teaches, and they're not going to be able to receive that love or compassion or kindness. And so it's a dead end. And it's helpful to make that really clear as early as possible. Is it, like, in the conversation, is it possible for me to love you and for us to disagree? So,
how do life groups play a role in your different demographics, college, young adult, and family?
What was the last part?
College, young adult, and families.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's all about the leaders. So, if the leaders are equipped, pastored, discipled, trained, resourced, there's a chance. There's like a much better chance that you'll have healthy life groups. And based on the gifting of the leader, is this person more apostolic? Are they more pastoral? Are they more prophetic? Are they more evangelistic? Are they, like, who is this person? Based on the gifting and calling of the life group leader, so the group will form. And so the group will carry out the vision and values. But no matter what their gifting is, my responsibility to cover and train and resource and care for the leader, it's make or break. If you care for the leader, if you resource the leader, if you train the leader, no matter how they're gifted, it'll lead to fruitfulness in some way based on their calling and gifting as a leader. If you don't, it won't. If you provide no support and no challenge for your leaders, they will inevitably, some of them inevitably will be swept up by compassion. They'll be swept up by ideas. They'll be swept up by arguments. They'll be swept up by something that culture is bringing into their group. And so think of them more like house churches. It won't be the structure. Remember, cultural Christianity is over. Like, it won't be the structure, if you will, that you build that'll lead to healthy life groups. It'll be your ability to disciple the leaders. And this is not new. I mean, this is how Antioch started. But I think many churches have gotten away from this. It's a lot of work to try to cover the leaders. It's a lot more work than to just build a structure and say, here, plug and play, ready, go. In our context, truly in a post-Christian urban context, it all hinges on the leader. Can we disciple and cover the leaders?
Jordan says, I'm in college ministry in Fort Worth. What advice would you give for ministering to an age group that does feel like their social agenda is so vitally important in their lives?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by social agenda, but I would say agree and press in on anything that you can. So, like, we've done more for the unhoused demographic in our city in the last 2 or 3 years than ever before. Like, we legitimately have anywhere from 7 to 15 people that are unhoused that come to our service on Sunday. They're part of groups. They're in relationships. We go out and offer food and drinks once a week. Like, we are pressing into helping with homelessness, and so are people that have maybe a social gospel. That's great. We want to do that. That's not going to be central for us. Jesus and our Orthodox Christianity is going to be central, but a part of that is going to be linking arms and partnering and doing what we can to help with unhoused situations. Same with race. Man, anywhere, any changes that we can make that will promote diversity and promote honor and value of all peoples, we want to make those changes, and we want to support those causes as much as we can without making them central. Man, on the gender and sexuality stuff, like, again, like, I'm in the heart of this. Like, our gay pride parade's 50 years old. You just have to be clear, and you have to be compassionate, and this will disrupt a lot of people and cause a lot of people to turn away from your church. And if you're the only church in the area, then what you're saying is they're turning away from the church. But in the end, it's the most loving thing to do, if it's true. If it's really true, it's undoubtedly the most loving thing to do. And so you just, again, that gets back to your identity, what you believe about God, what you believe about yourself, where your security is. If your security is just in gathering lots of people and creating a cultural Christianity environment, then you should be really loose with what you believe and let people believe what they want. If you care about Orthodox Christianity being a leader that is following Jesus and a part of the church he's building, I think you have to be clear, even when it turns people away.
Last one. Daniel said, so I'm understanding that you're saying belief before belonging. Can you speak more to that and how that plays out in ministry?
Yeah, I'm speaking specifically in that to our gatherings, like our Sunday gatherings specifically, or our encounter nights, or our large group gatherings, and also to the like promotion of our church, like website stuff, app stuff. If you were going to do social media stuff. I'm not speaking to the mission and what it means to train the disciples in your church to make disciples. That's different. My neighbors are a great example. Like, literally, my neighbors. Man, we've known them now for 2 years, and we love them. We've had them over. We say hi to them all the time. They bring over their daughter to play with our goats. Like, it's wonderful. They know I'm a pastor. I'm trying to build bridges. But if they were to ask me, what does your church believe? I would just tell them. I wouldn't be like, no, hey, you know what? I wouldn't try to woo people. I think the idea of like belong before you believe, or belong before, it's really nice. But for a church in an urban post-Christian, I mean, you gotta, like, I don't know how you guys will think about this, but like, just try to imagine like the underground church in China or in Afghanistan. And I know that's like the other, just so extreme. But like, do you think they're like, whatever, just doesn't matter what you believe, just come hang out with us? No. Absolutely not. So we're not that extreme, but that's the direction that we're facing in our country right now. It just is. This is not doom and gloom. Like, it's just, we used to think of ourselves as like a Christian nation, and there's lots of people still fighting for that. And if that's you, bless you. I've kind of given up on us being a Christian nation. And if we see a revival and become any semblance of a Christian nation again, it's going to come through Orthodox Christianity, not through polishing all the aspects of cultural Christianity. So, all right, with that being said, we have 12 minutes. I want to get to mission. What would be the most important things for mission? Okay, so what do you do if you are trying to hold this line and be an Orthodox church? Like, how do you think about mission? And I'll just give you 3 thoughts. First thought is, you have to lean in to the power of God. You have to lean into the power of God. You have to, like, the prayer walks, the power encounters with people. This is the way to see successful ministry and evangelism in this context. Like, it is not, you are not going to talk anyone in to believing in Jesus. Like, you're just not. I mean, you're not going to like apologeticize somebody. It's great. I love apologetics. Those aren't the tools. The tools are power encounters. That's it. You've got to facilitate someone. You've got to facilitate a moment where someone encounters God. That's it. And I mean, so I'm posturing myself, whether we're setting up an outreach literally to go out on the street, or whether I'm out to dinner with someone, or whether I'm getting to know my neighbors, or whatever it is. Like, I am, like, the people in my workplace, the way we're training, or like if we're trying to engage our city, we're trying to facilitate them to encounter Jesus. And the quickest, most effective way is a power encounter. literally praying for someone. So when you do the thing, which probably most of you do or have done, where you ask someone if you can pray for them, and they say yes, because most people will say yes. In a post-Christian urban context, they'll say yes. They'll receive prayer. If you say, can we talk about Jesus? They'll say no. If you say, can I pray for you? They will likely say yes. So when they say yes, will you take the spiritual authority that you've been given? They have just invited you to have authority in their life. Will you take that and will you really press in? Ask God for a word, pray for a miracle, pray down the presence of God on their life. And when they encounter God through that prayer, then they'll want to talk about Jesus. So, man, part of the reason that I think we're in the best season we've ever been in as a church is because we're praying more as a church than we ever have before. We have 6 prayer meetings that happen during the week, and they're not that great. They're not like everyone's on the floor and it's so much momentum. The prayer meetings are fine. They're just fine, but we're doing them. And the fact that we're praying as much as we are absolutely is linked to the fruitfulness and the momentum that we're seeing church-wide and in our city. So you got to lean into the power of God. There's no way around that. Secondly, you got to be authentic. You got to be authentic. You can't copy somebody else. That's why I share all these things about community, etc. You gotta be you. You gotta do what God's called you to do, and how you preach, and how you teach people to interact in mission and in discipleship. It has to come out of authenticity, because authenticity is another tool for evangelism. People are so done with inauthentic church. It just they can smell it. They hate it. People don't want inauthentic anything. You guys know this. The big stage, the Walmarts, the chain restaurants, the mass-produced kind of experience is over. People want personal connection. They want personal experience, organic, local, natural, all that stuff. They want that, and they want that from you too. And so you've got to be you. So that identity, as you're embracing the place, you got to be you. And I'm really just specifically about preaching. Don't try to sound like somebody else. You can try that for a year just to find your own voice and learn, but you've got to be you. You've got to be authentic. So power of God, authentic, and then lastly would be just innovative. Innovative in terms of programmatic outreach and mission, but also innovative interpersonally. So what do I mean by that? An example of this for us would be spiritual readings. So we have an outreach that we do called spiritual readings, and I'll make this really quick. What we simply do is we go out, we set up a table at University of Washington, or we did this inside the CHOP. CHOP was this country that was built within our city. I don't know if you saw that on the news, but we went into that. You go into these heightened areas, and we set up a table with a sign that says free spiritual readings. And then we have some people behind who are ready to give out prophetic words. And so there's a long line that forms, and people come up, and they're like, free spiritual readings. And so then they come up, we're really natural and normal about it, and we say, oh yeah, this is Joe, this is Cindy, she's going to give you a spiritual reading. So then the person says, okay, I'm going to ask the Spirit of God what he's saying about your life. Then we ask God, what are you saying? Sometimes we get really specific, unique words. God just pours out through the prophetic, and it's awesome. Sometimes we don't really get anything super specific, and in that case, we just share with them what the Spirit of God has already said about their life, which is God loves you so much. God made you. God has seen you every day of your life. God knows everything you've been through that's hard. God's been with you every single moment of every single day. We just tell them biblical truth. But they receive it as a spiritual reading. They're so blessed. It's just amazing. People are like, man, thank you so much. And then inevitably they're like, how did you do that? What was that? You're like, well, and then we tell them our testimony. I realized, I don't know if you know anything about Jesus, but he saved me, and now I'm in a relationship with God. I can hear God, and so this idea of creating some type of an outreach model that is innovative, that takes down the initial barriers for people and allows you to get to that conversation about Jesus. So, but also innovative interpersonally. Jim Yost, if you know that name, he taught us something that's called Shema statements. A Shema statement is a statement that you're ready with that allows you to have a spiritual conversation with someone without them knowing that you're a Christian pastor. This could be anything. But honestly, like the most common one that I use is, man, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. So what that means is, like, I'll be interacting with someone at a coffee shop, or I'll be on an airplane, and we'll start talking. We're having a normal conversation, and then they'll say, well, what do you do? What do you do? And if I say, oh, I'm a pastor in Seattle, conversation is over. Like 90% of the time, it's dirty look, it's wall is up, like we're not talking anymore. In Oklahoma, if I meet someone and I say I'm a pastor, they're like, awesome. Dude, that's awesome. And it kind of shocks me whenever I go somewhere else and that happens. I'm like, whoa, really? So instead of saying, when someone says, what do you do? Instead of saying pastor, I usually say, I mean, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. And when I say that, some people just go, yeah, totally, me too. And then I don't talk to them. But sometimes they say, well, try me. Like what is it? And then I start telling my story. I'm like, well, when I was 21, I dropped out of college, and I was a mess, and start sharing my testimony, and then I get to Jesus, and I talk all about Jesus in my life, and then I'm like, and so that's actually led me to be like the facilitator of this community of people that also have been changed by Jesus and set free by Jesus. And what about you? Like, do you have any experience with Jesus? And all of a sudden, just because I thought innovatively about how to answer the question, like, what do you do? I'm in a real conversation about something that matters, and I haven't been cut off because people think they're supposed to hate pastors. So I'll just end with a quote, and this would be a Tim Keller quote. What Tim Keller says is that in every major city in the United States, most people don't personally know someone who believes in Jesus that they respect. In every city in the United States, most people, over 50% of the city, doesn't know someone personally that believes in Jesus that they respect. And that has impacted our mission. We're like, whoa, we're going to be like respectable, like we're going to be good people that have real, authentic, good relationships that are carrying Orthodox Christianity, carrying the power of God, and innovative in the way that we do ministry in our city. And we just believe like that's what God's called us to do in a post-Christian urban context. So I don't know if we have any time left for questions about mission, but if there are any, I'm happy to keep going for a few minutes.
There are currently no questions.
No questions. Awesome. Hey, man, I hope that this was helpful for you. My prayer for you this morning was that God would take something that was said and use it to impact the city where you live for his kingdom. So just pray for you. Jesus, thanks that you know every story of every person that's sitting here today. God, you know the callings and the grace that you have for them. You know the purposes and the plans and the intentions for them. And I just pray, Lord, great kingdom success for every person. I pray humility and boldness and grit for every person. I pray innovation and authenticity for every person. God, I pray that there would be Orthodox Christian communities that are birthed and reproduced out of this team of people that are listening today. Just bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Good to be with you guys. Have great lives.